Welcome to this super exciting event. My name is Nagraj Rao, and I'm a member of the Oxford Saïd Media and Entertainment Club, and also an MBA student at Saïd Business School at Oxford. I think it's fairly obvious. You all know how excited I am about this event, but I can also say that there's plenty of excitement in this room, especially amongst the Indian students at Oxford. And some of them have given up on the advanced Excel class just to attend the session. So Siddharth, if they flunked that class, we're going to blame it on Siddharth Roy Kapur. Just to give a formal introduction to Mr. Roy Kapur, he's the founder and managing director of Roy Kapur Films and the president of the Producers Guild of India. Before he became the MD of Roy Kapur Films, he was the managing director of Walt Disney Company in India and UTV Studios, which is pretty incredible. His filmography, I'm sure everyone that has watched his films is shouting for joy, but it is a really diverse set of films, right from the highest grossing films like Dangal, PK. In fact, I believe Dangal made 200 million or something such in China. Chennai Express, Cake, Rowdy Rathore, but he's also made some extremely genre-defining films like Rang De Basanti, Barfi, Devdi, Wednesday, The Lunchbox, Sky is Pink, and one of my favorites, which is Ye Ballet. He's been regularly featured in Variety's top 500 list of influential people in entertainment globally and Hollywood Reporter's Next Generation Asia inaugural class of young leaders. He's amongst numerous other accolades that I'm obviously missing at this point. Early on his career, for people that are into brand management, he was working at Procter & Gamble and was also the VP of marketing for Star TV in Hong Kong. And if any TV interested people, I believe he's also worked to bring Kaun Banega, Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, the Indian equivalent, which is Kaun Banega Crorepati, was the legend, Mr. Amitabh Bachchan. And just to sort of peek into his personal side, he himself was an actor, and I believe used to act in college at some point and headed the College Dramatic Society, and I'd love to hear more about that at some point. His wife, Vidya Balan, I think is one of the most phenomenal actors from India and very adored, and now has turned producer with Nut Cut, which is a short film. I hope that'll be available for us to watch at some point. And both his brothers, Aditya and Kunal, are very accomplished actors themselves. So with that, I want to get this conversation started. Thank you again, Siddharth, for your time.
Thanks for having me. And I just want to apologize to everyone once again for the late start. I really do detest being late, though my sort of performance this evening has been quite contrary to that assertion. But sorry about wasting your time. But I'm happy that we're all here now.
Not a problem at all, and I think the pleasure is ours, and we're really glad to have you. So, Siddharth, I want to get the conversation started, but also want to flag to us, to the people that have joined this conversation. If you have any questions, please do raise your hand. I'll try to look at it through my very thick glasses, or post it on the chat box, and I'll give you a shout out. As I said, I don't want to do much of the talking, but just to get the audience warmed up. Siddharth, what I found very interesting about your background is you've actually gotten an MBA yourself. So you have the quant side of things, or the commerce and management side of things, but you've also, as I mentioned in the introduction, you've worked in plays and theater. So can you talk a little bit about your journey into how you got into producing? Was it a natural pivot? Did you know that this is what you wanted to do? And how did you decide that this was the career for you?
It's been a pretty interesting journey, because I think not many children grow up saying, I want to be a producer. Most people don't even know what being a producer really is. Most people, including me, feel that it's just about the guy who finances the film and then lets the director go ahead and do his job. So that's definitely not how I started off. In school, I did a lot of theater. I did that all through college as well. I did what we like to call English professional theater in Bombay, but it really is amateur theater, where you've got a day job through the day, and in the evenings you rehearse and then you do shows on the weekends. So I always try to balance out that side of my interests and hobbies. But what happened with me in college was quite interesting, where I entered it obviously with these aspirations of getting my BCom, but simultaneously figuring out whether by the end of it I wanted to be an actor, and then therefore go into that scheme of things. But I realized that I was actually having more fun putting the slate of productions for the college together for the year. And I like to be sort of on top of that, from raising sponsorships to doing the marketing to figuring out whether we've got plays in different genres through the year. And I realized that my aspirations had moved away from acting and much more into sort of having a bird's eye view of the entire creative process. And that thought actually stayed with me as I went along through my career. Even after that, did my MBA, went and worked with Procter and Gamble, Star TV, etc. But film was always, the area that I most gravitated towards. There weren't that many structured opportunities at that point of time to actually have a professional career in movie making. The film industry was and still is to a large extent, but much less so than it was in the past. Quite incestuous, where you have, film families like sort of, you have to be to the manner born in a sense. So if your grandfather's been an actor and your grandfather's been a producer, you will tend to take up the mantle and do the same. But I think what Ronnie Screwvala was doing with UTT at that time was really revolutionary with regard to really coming in from the outside and having had a background in, the like sort of business of creativity when it came to theater and television, coming into the Hindi film industry and wanting to do the same there, which is have a professionalized studio set up, really put in systems and processes to take forward the scale of what we were doing much more as sort of a cottage industry in the past. And when that opportunity presented itself with Ronnie, I sort of put my hands up for it and said, absolutely, that's something I'd love to be doing. So it was a little bit of a like sort of tortuous path to get to where I am today. But that's much more because there wasn't really that many structured ways of going about doing it in the past. And I'm glad I've ended up where I have, which is helping to, get people to tell the stories they want to tell in the best way that they can tell it. And that, I think, really is the job of a producer, to be able to be a creative catalyst in a process where all the factors of production and all the talent, that you can assemble come together to create something that you hope lives on for years after you.
That's amazing, and it's really nice that you talked about your journey with Ronnie Screwvala, who I believe you've mentioned in several interviews of yours that I've watched, was your mentor in many ways. And I actually want to come to the beginning of your film career. It seems like you started your career with a film like Rang De Basanti with a huge star like Aamir Khan, but it was a very unique idea for the time, at least. I mean, it was a political drama, high concept. And then at the same time, you had a film like Khosla Ka Ghosla, which I can personally relate with because I lived in Delhi and encroachment was certainly a problem that someone in my extended family faced. And your films since then have been super eclectic, right? I mean, as I mentioned, you've done these blockbuster films, but you've also made these high concept, niche films, which have also done just as well. So I really want to understand what's the choice behind picking a script. How do you put together a film? How do you decide on what script to greenlight? And how do you balance the empirics of, okay, does the film make enough money versus your creative instinct? Because clearly you bring both sides to the business. Would love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, that's a great question because there's no easy answer to it. So I'll try to attempt it by speaking about what I do as a producer really. Is that I think the first thing for me really is to react emotionally to a script. I mean, is it something that I'm passionate about? Do I love the story so much that I really feel it needs to be told? Is it something that was able to grab me when I read it or when I heard a narration from a writer? And if it is, then moving on to the next step of now putting your thinking cap on and figuring out, okay, so given that it's something that I really want to be able to tell, is it making sense to tell it? So what's the budget of the film? What are the empirics with regard to the performance of that director in the past? The proposed star cast and how have they been performing in the past? What might their remuneration be? So putting all those facts together, what's the genre of the film, and therefore is that a genre that is more suited towards theatrical, or should one be looking at it as a straight to digital film or series? And then getting into the projected revenue for the film, and how much of that will you be able to de-risk before the theatrical release if it happens to be a theatrical release, and therefore how exposed are you with regard to the commerce. But I think if you're asking about that first reaction to wanting to make a film or not, I think that has got to be an instinctive and a gut level reaction, because you're going to be spending a couple of years of blood, sweat and tears, you and a whole team of people putting it together. So it better be a story that you really want to tell.
Absolutely. So I guess you're definitely leaning more towards the poet, but are forced to fit in the quant to make sure that you're able to propel the ideas that you want to take forward. Really interesting.
I actually look at it as it's exciting to do both in a sense, because it's show business, right? It's not show, as people say. So at the end of the day, both show and business are as important, because it isn't art for art's sake. You aren't a painter sitting somewhere making a painting without taking anyone's money and therefore free to do as you choose. You are ultimately, involved in a very, very commercial art form. And therefore, you need to be responsible both to yourself as well as to the people working with you, as well as to the people putting money into the venture, that it is a commercial success. And you should derive as much satisfaction from the commercial success as you do from the critical acclaim. Because that I think will make you a truly rounded, a truly rounded filmmaker.
Okay, that's so I stand corrected. Not just a poet, but you have to enjoy both processes with equal gusto. I guess that would be the feedback, and that's wonderful. I do want to talk a little bit about your entrepreneurial side, because obviously you've worked with big corporates. I mean, UTV, Walt Disney Studios India. But now you've become an entrepreneur with your own production company, and a lot of us are hoping to sort of delve into that direction, and I hope people will ask questions more about it. But can you talk about what sort of propelled you into making that switch in 2017, if I'm not mistaken, and what have been some of the lessons that you've learned with this transition, and what have been some of the successes or some of the great things about not being in a traditional sort of corporate environment?
So, it's interesting because in a sense, I'm a mid-career entrepreneur. I mean, I haven't been an entrepreneur for the first, sort of 42 years of my life, the first 20 years of my professional life. And therefore, I'm very well aware of the way it works within a structured corporation. I've worked in various multinational, sort of corporations, and I understand how the decision-making process works there and the different things that you need to consider when you're taking decisions and the number of people involved in those decisions. And I think the shift when you do become an entrepreneur, however much power and authority you might have wielded within an organization earlier, it is a pretty seismic shift, because you might say it earlier, but the buck here truly does stop with you. However intrapreneurial you thought you were being, or the company, asked you to be when you were working with an organization, you were still getting your paycheck at the end of the month, right? That would not change. And the success or a failure of a film would mean, if the film fails, you probably won't get a big hike the next year. But if a film works, you'll get a bonus. But you're not seeing the profit or the loss really hit you in a very direct manner, other than the way that it impacts your career or your remuneration. But I think when you're an entrepreneur, your neck is truly on the line, and there's a certain thrill and excitement to that. There's a certain adrenaline rush that comes with that. There's obviously a certain pride in the fact that you are like sticking your neck out and doing it. But there are also periods of stress and uncertainty, which I think everyone would have to deal with. What I feel very grateful for is the years of professional life that I had working on multiple projects at scale with large teams and in large corporations, that have given me the ability to be able to put systems and processes in place, especially in such a creative business, which help us to be able to bring subjectivity to purely the creative part of what we do, and a lot of objectivity to the rest of our business. And I think that's really important, and that I think is in a sense the ability to reduce risk as much as you can, because the business you're involved in is a huge risk in the first place. So specifically when it comes to the business of show business. So that's really what one has attempted to do. But it's a pretty exhilarating feeling to branch out on your own and do your own thing, because as I said, the buck really does stop with you.
Can you actually, just to sort of push you on that a little bit, can you sort of talk about what sort of strategies have you put in place, like an example maybe of what you've learned in those 10 years of working in corporate, and putting in that system to make sure that even though you're an entrepreneur right now, those systems are a well-oiled machine, even in an entrepreneurial setup. Can you give an example maybe?
Sure.
Yeah.
So not to, I mean, I hope this won't bore people because it's a little bit wonkish sort of stuff, and they thought they were coming to listen to something about movie making. But basically, it's a lot of financial systems and processes that many mom and pop shops don't take into account when they're starting out because they believe they're so small, so it doesn't make sense for them to really have those many systems in place. But you need a really great finance and accounts team that is happy to challenge you and does not just do your bidding. And I think that's very important for an entrepreneur to have a finance head who challenges him, because otherwise you'll just get high on your own supply and you will do exactly as you want. And your finance team will basically be a team of accountants doing as you tell them. That's not the idea. So having a great finance team in place is very, very important for any production house setup. I think after that, having a strong, young and hungry creative team who really is moving into positions where they want to prove themselves, they want to be able to stamp their name on things, they want to be able to create really interesting work that, that they're able to call their own in the years to come, and that becomes almost like something that has their stamp on it through their entire creative lives. That's very important. And at least for me, not hiring people who are so senior that they might not be comfortable in a setup where the structure is so flat and everyone is involved in everything simultaneously. That I think is very important to me. So putting those HR systems in place where you're not over hiring and you're hiring at just the right level and you're hiring the right number of people and you're only growing the team organically when you really need to grow it and when it's very clear that it needs to grow further, because it's always nice for everyone to feel a little stretched rather than feeling like they need to spread the work around in order to justify everyone's presence. That I think is very important as well. And I think the other part of it is really when it comes to the, again, it's in line with what I said on the finance side, but your production cost, auditors and accounting, etc., is so important on a film, because you can have the best production team in place, but if you're not keeping a check and control over your expenses and your finances, movie budgets can tend to spiral out of control. It's like you're riding a wild horse, and if you leave those reins, the horse is going to run away, and you have no control over it after a point. Because once a film is hit, its stride, there's very little you can do to control it if you haven't planned it well enough. So I think just putting all these management systems in place, a system where people are the first thing I tell people is, I want to hear the bad news first, right? I really want to hear the good news. I'm very happy to hear the good news, but tell me the bad news first, and then I'll jump in and help you with it if you need some help with it. But don't shield me from it, because that's just going to be counterproductive for both of us in the future. So I think having a culture of that nature would help, and you don't always get it right. You'll have times when you've gone wrong in setting the culture and you need to sort of course correct at the right time. But generally speaking, I would encourage constructive dissent and constructive debate and argument in order to be able to get to things that keep getting better.
And I think, that's a culture that we also thrive here, constructive dissent and, trying to push the envelope without trying to break the, complete walls of everything. So yeah, that's been insightful. I think there are a lot of comments coming in. I want to put out a note. Does anyone want to ask a question? Please do raise your hand. And Siddharth would, I'm sure, be very excited to talk to you. Anyone? Or anyone in the chat box having any questions? I think Krishna, you have something. Do you want to say something?
I have so many questions, honestly, because it's just an exciting moment for me. But I'm going to try and keep it to one formal question. If there's time later, I'll ask an informal question at the end about NCPA chutney sandwiches. But for now, I wanted to ask, this has been a constant question for me for a year now, right? Since COVID hit and also before, there's a lot of transition to moving direct to streaming platforms or direct to TV also at some point with movies, right? And I wanted to ask someone, how has the numbers game changed for the Bollywood market? And for also all the foreign markets that are just so hungry for your films, right? When you're moving direct to streaming, some of them can't access. And obviously streaming doesn't give you revenue based on the number of views. They're giving you an upfront payment. So I don't know how the numbers have changed and how the planning works at the production end. So
yeah. No, so notwithstanding the last year, because it's been a bit of a funky year with COVID having hit and therefore, business plans going completely sort of awry. But I think when you look at it on a going basis, probably a year ago, the way that most people were looking at it was that platforms are giving you a chance to be able to tell stories that you didn't have an opportunity to tell earlier. If you take the example of Ye Ballet, right? It's a film that we made for Netflix that went direct to Netflix. A story of two boys from, you know, the slums of Bombay had to be new talent. You couldn't cast, you know, Varun Dhawan and Siddharth Malhotra in those two roles. You had an Israeli-American dance instructor who clearly you couldn't. I mean, Tom Walters passed on, but you know you couldn't cast an ex-Tom Walter in that part. You had to be authentic, and you had to do that film right. And therefore that person was not going to be able to speak in Hindi. He would have to speak in English. Ballet, which is such a rarefied dance form that even people in metros, probably South Bombay and South Delhi, know. You know, the sort of intricacies of it, if that. And therefore the film was one which would not easily be told for a theatrical audience. So to get a chance to actually go out there and still tell the story, you could only do it on a Netflix, right? So I think for the creative community, it's been massive because they've got the opportunity to be able to tell these stories. For producers, I think it's also a very interesting time because we've jumped straight into the world of high quality, like sort of digital series, which we didn't have earlier. So we've gone straight from either movies on one end or daily soaps on the other end to now creating this new animal called 10 episode, 1 hours each, multiple seasonal arcs, characters that go across, you know, years and years of programming, and everyone's just had to jump in and do it. So for the creative community, it's great, and for producers, it's great too, because you get to create an IP that actually lives on over, you know, multiple years, and that can give you that sense of a streamlined revenue. Now, while you don't own that IP, that's true, you still have the opportunity to be able to create that for a platform, and the margins being pretty decent. So it's been a good time overall, I think, for the production fraternity. What's happened over the last year, and therefore where we sit today, is that with theatrical being where it is, at least in the short to medium term, it's going to be quite difficult to actually greenlight a film for theatrical and be convinced that it will definitely be something that I'll release in theaters. So therefore, platforms have become that much more important because they are actually going to be able to give you the chance to make a movie and then take that call about whether you want to go theatrical or you want to go straight to a platform, which I think was not an option you had 3 or 4 years ago. So in a nutshell, it's a really interesting time. Again, notwithstanding the rules for the OTT platforms that were released last week, which might, you know, once again put everyone in a tizzy with regard to what sort of content we should be making and what we shouldn't. But that's a subject for a different question.
Absolutely. I have so many questions on that one, but there are lots of hands that are raised, Siddharth. So Emma, do you want to ask your question?
Sure. Siddharth, it's amazing to have you here. Thank you so much for joining us. Following kind of bouncing off of Krishna's question and also talking about streaming and the change in content, I am absolutely fascinated. So many questions. But do you find that you're kind of changing what you're looking for in a story as a producer now that something to go moving from like these big blockbuster features and making those films to your more kind of segmented, okay, cool, let's make a limited series or let's make a TV show, that kind of thing, and then pushing that into international markets? So because there's such a big craving, especially through Netflix's accessibility in India. And now, I mean, I know South Africa, we love, obsessed with Bollywood. My mother has made me watch Bollywood since I was a child. So deep obsession. And now that it's on Netflix, it's like this phenomenal thing that people can access from around the world. So is that kind of shifting your focus on stories and how you're evaluating what stories to choose?
Sure. So, I mean, the thing is that Indian producers are still looking at Indian content for an Indian audience. And if it goes across to a global audience, that's just gravy, right? Because the streamers here are greenlighting content for India specifically. Now, but something like Delhi Crime, for example, which happened to actually have been commissioned out of the US, that then came to India, I think it got the opportunity to work both in India as well as outside of India. So I'm hoping that streamers look at content like that and decide that wouldn't it be great if we were able to pick material that worked in India, but also had the ability to be able to appeal internationally, because that would be a huge incentive for us as producers and for the entire creative community. With regard to what one looks at today, I'll be completely honest with you. You know, in the early days when the streamers came in, most producers were just looking at the scripts that they decided not to make for theatrical and saying, okay, fine, now we can make this for digital, right? Because it's not a theatrical like sort of opportunity, but it can work on digital. But I think people have realized over a period of time that that's not really how it works. It's still got to be compelling. It's still got to be really good. And it can't just be because you decided not to make it for the theatrical window, it can go to digital. So I think for us, it's about being able to find material when it comes to series with characters that can live on across multiple seasons, and for those stories to be stories that do not have a finite end and can just keep getting told. When it comes to a movie, I definitely think that we're looking at creating a 1.5 or 2 hour film that now becomes a theatrical event. Now, whether that means big blockbuster entertainers with huge stars, or whether that's horror, or whether that's laugh out loud comedy, but something that gives people a communal experience when they're all sitting together and wanting to watch that film in a darkened cinema hall together is a much bigger kick than watching it at home. Whereas I think drama, light comedy, slice of life, more intimate stories are definitely going to be told on platforms much more than theatrically.
Awesome, thank you.
Thanks, thanks, Emma, for your question. We have Kate Zhu, who has the next question for you, Siddharth. Kate, do you want to unmute yourself and put yourself on video?
Kate, we can't hear you.
All right. Till we get Kate back on, Rohit, you have a question. Do you want to step in and ask your question?
Yeah. Hey, Siddharth. It's a really great session so far, and we are thoroughly enjoying it. So I want to bring you back on the OTT controversies and the new regulations which have come. I mean, I've seen that you have recently written an article on Times of India about it. So, I mean, what do you think those recommendations would affect the content creativity? And also, how do you think your non-market strategy frameworks will enhance under the new regulations and protests which have happened recently?
I'm sorry, I don't think I got your second question.
So what I was saying that, I mean, in the backdrop of the recent events like raids and we can say that the protests against certain series, Tanda, which happened in India. So how do you think your non-market strategy framework, how do you map those elements, your risk, your financial management?
Right. So, you know, it is a little bit early in the day for me to have a really structured comment on what these regulations are going to do. And I think the platforms are also digesting them right now. So I'd rather give them an opportunity to talk about it. But I think in principle, if I had to speak about it, I would definitely say that the fewer the regulations on creative expression, the more vibrant our culture will be, and the more, the more opportunities we'll give to our talent to be able to shine around the world. And I hope that whatever self-regulatory mechanism that we come up with, or this new one that's just been announced, takes into account that you're not going to really be able to run a business of this nature if you need a no objection certificate from, anyone who has a right to get offended. And I think that really is important for us to take into account. And I'm hoping that, the frivolous grievances are vetted out when it comes to the ones that actually come in for sort of consideration by the platforms, and the frivolous grievances are allowed to be vetted out because it's really important for us to only deal with the ones that have got some, have got some merit and therefore need to be looked into. But I am hopeful that it's treated with what we like to call in the content industry a soft touch regulation, and it's not really, something that curbs creative expression.
Thanks, Siddharth. We are really looking forward for more good movies and better content.
Great, thanks, Rohit. I'll give the opportunity to Kate again to ask her question. Kate's from China and she's a filmmaker, producer herself. Kate, go forward.
Thank you so much, Nikraj. Sorry, guys, I need to skip the lines because I have another group meeting. But it's really nice to hear from you because I worked in the States as a producer before and also in China. And also I know there's like a co-production company between India and China. So and also I know a lot of Indian films has huge box office in China, and their performance almost the best from all the foreign films imported in China. So I do have a lot of questions, but primarily, I want to know what's like your opinion on the future of the theater and the streaming service? Because I think it's pretty like urgent for us to think about right now, because a lot of films, they cannot be shown in the theater due to the COVID. And I mean, there's like a huge financial loss to that. And also, I think for streaming, they do change the business model and the landscape of traditional filmmaking. And what's your opinion on those? Thank you.
Thanks. So, I mean, of course, it's been a terrible year for theaters. The last year has been really tough. But I think the positive, I mean, the green shoots that are emerging are like what happened in China a couple of weekends ago, right? Where you had a box office of $725 million between 2 or 3 movies on a single weekend. And that, I think, gives all those in the theatrical business a lot of hope. Just the feeling that people are dying to come back to the movie theaters once they feel they're safe. And hopefully that's not an experience that we'll have to do without for too long. Having said that, I do think there was a change happening even before COVID hit us, which is there'll be a certain type of film that works in theaters and a certain type that works on platforms. And I think now that the entire world, even the laggards, have been pushed into the digital age, and they've come to understand how easy it is to just sit on your couch and flick through thousands, in fact, if not tens of thousands of hours of content. To get them to move out, put their jeans on, get into a car or a cab, make that trip to the cinema hall, buy a ticket, wait in a line, buy their popcorn, sit down, wait for the ads, sticky floors, people on their phones, an interval here in India, leaving in big groups after, parking. To get them to go through that entire experience, I think you're going to have to give them something really compelling to move off their couch. And I think we as filmmakers need to take that on as a challenge and just say, we're going to make some really great stuff to get people back into the cinemas. But here's a great opportunity to do stuff that we would not otherwise be able to do on platforms which are digital. So I don't think the cinematic experience is going to go away, but the type of movies are definitely going to be different.
Awesome. Thanks, Kate, for your question, and thanks, Siddharth, for the response. The next person is Akanksha. Akanksha, do you want to get off mute and ask your question?
Yeah, thank you. Firstly, thank you, Nagaraj and team, for making this happen. And thank you, Siddharth, for being here. So fascinating to hear you speak. So very quickly, I'm Akanksha. I'm an alumni from Saïd, and I work in impact investments, which is very different in a way, but having a few friends who are in Bollywood or who are doing different things within the film industry, it's really fascinating to see this lens. And I have, like Krishna, many questions, just so fascinating to hear you speak about it. So thank you, but I right now stick with just maybe 2 or 3 at max. So first question is, you mentioned—
Akanksha, just to, there's a lot of questions, so we'll keep it to 1, please.
Okay, 1. All right, let's have just 1 question. Okay, I'll have to select 1. So I'll select this. You mentioned show business is a risk in itself, right? It's the biggest risk. So I would love for you to kind of provide us a lens in that. And I'm sorry if this has been asked before or answered before, but well, what does that look like? Especially, what does it look like for films? What does it look like for the OTT platforms in different ways? And why do you say that? And how do we break down? How do we break down? I'd love for you to break some myths here. When people say content is king, what does it look like? What does innovation look like in the filmmaking industry at the moment? And yeah, what do you mean when you say the show business is the biggest risk? Well, just break it down. Thank you.
You know, when I said show business is the biggest risk of all, I guess what I meant is that when you're dealing with anything subjective, right? When you're dealing with any subjective reality that you're hoping that everyone buys into because you really believe in it, you are dealing with an element of risk. And when you're going to be putting money into that and be saying, here's something that I really loved, and now I hope that number 1, I can get it made the way I imagined it when I read it or heard it. And number 2, having made it the way I imagined it, that everyone else loves it too. So I think that's the element of risk that is there in any creative, piece of work and any creative enterprise. What one tries to do in show business is to reduce that risk by obviously having as many saleable factors be on your side as possible. whether that means being able to de-risk your revenues, or bringing in saleable, entities into your film that the audience already loves, be that talent, be that music, it could be anything. So that's the element of risk that I was talking about. Your second question, Akanksha, I didn't quite get.
So I was actually just asking you to break it down. What does that look like for OTT? Is it different for OTT platforms? Is it different for films?
Sure.
And what is is this a myth that content is king? Just break down some of the myths that we keep hearing.
So, if you talk to distribution platforms, they'll say content is king, but distribution is God. So there's always a better saying for, whoever's involved in whichever part of the business to come up with. So I don't think you can do without content and you can't do without distribution, right? So I think it's just a needless debate to have. You need to have both. But when it comes to platforms, I guess the difference with the platform is that they're selling a subscription. And so they're not really selling you a discrete piece of content that they're asking you to buy into. They're asking you to buy into their entire smorgasbord of an offering that they keep refreshing and renewing every few days or weeks or months. And when it comes to a film, and I'm asking you to buy a movie ticket for my movie, I'm actually asking you to buy into my trailer of this one movie that I would like you to sample. So that, I guess, is the difference. So probably in that respect, platforms have got their risks a little bit more spread out because they've got the opportunity to be able to learn from their mistakes and just keep making new stuff versus the filmmaker who's making one movie. Consequently, for producers working with platforms, it's an interesting de-risking opportunity for their business model where they are commissioned to make something. And if they make it within a budget, there's a certain fee that they will get, regardless of the performance of that piece of content. So I guess, there are different risks at different stages within the value chain for different players.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for answering that. And I'm attending another session on how entertainment industry interacts with impact investments, like another time. So yeah, good and interesting to hear thoughts on that at some point. But yeah.
Thanks. Thanks a lot, Akanksha. We have our next person asking a question. Humphrey, go ahead. He's our co-chair for the Media and Entertainment Group.
Thanks, Nagoj, and thanks a lot, Siddharth. Really interesting how you talk. I'm from the UK, and I definitely would echo previous sentiments about the sort of global love for Indian content, Indian film. And you look at the success of Life of Pi, Slumdog Millionaire, and Lion. But I think, you correct me if I'm wrong, but I think only a couple of Indian-made films have made over $100 million at the box office, at the externally. And I don't know if this is linked at all, but I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about your time with Disney, running the Disney in India. Talk a bit about their strategy and whether they have plans for bigger productions within the company, bigger, more sort of outward-facing productions.
Sure. Thanks. So, I mean, I can't speak to Disney's strategy right now, but I can talk a little bit about what it was when I was there. Most foreign studios in India have been here for the last 70 or 80 years, like sort of distributing their movies, if not longer. And I think what they've come to realize over that period of time is that if they really had to make a dent in the Indian market, they had to produce locally, because India's got such a thriving local cinematic language and culture, and there's a certain idiom of our cinema that we're so attuned to. We have our own staff, our stars, we have our way of storytelling, etc., etc. So for foreign studios to really come here, they realized that they had to produce locally. They couldn't just bring in their big hits from there and expect to really make a dent, which is what then happened over the last 15 to 20 years. And therefore, from Fox to Disney to Sony to Viacom, they all came into India and started producing at scale in local languages: Hindi, Tamil, Telugu, Malayalam, various languages across the country. And also, consequently, to your first point about Life of Pi, Slumdog, etc., these films all happen to be based in India, but they're as Indian as Lawrence of Arabia was Arabian. So in a sense, they were made by foreign filmmakers. They were produced they were produced outside of the country. And I think in a sense we're victims of our own success, because we're in this pond which is quite self-sustaining. And therefore, India's never really had to reach out to the world to get them to enjoy our cinema the way that probably France and Italy and Spain have had to do over the years, because they really wanted to be able to sustain their local cinema by reaching out to the world. So in a sense, because of the Indian population and the diaspora overseas, we could stick with our 3-hour movies with intervals and songs and dances and have everyone enjoy them. And that became the Bollywood kitsch kind of film that people would know about and watch, but in a very like, let's smoke up and watch this Bollywood film kind of way, right? But I think it's important going forward for us to understand that we've now got the opportunity to actually be able to, with the new generation of filmmakers that have come up now, having been influenced both by the West as well as by India, that cinematic language actually comes naturally to them. So they'll tell some really Indian stories, but in a 2-hour non-interval without songs format, and they'll do that organically because that's the cinematic language they've now grown up in. So I'm hoping that the next 5 to 10 years actually means that we're going to be able to get our movies to reach out much more than they have in the past.
Thank you.
Great question, Humphrey. We'll move on to our next person. Abhishek, do you want to get off mute and ask your very challenging question? He's one of those that has missed the Excel class. So, Siddharth, you're going to be blamed for it.
No, I'm not missing it. The advantage of 2 screens. Thanks, Siddharth. Thanks so much for your time. 2 quick questions. One, before the regulations came into the OTT, did the freedom to do whatever you want to in OTT put theater at a disadvantage? And were you ever at a point where you were like, I would rather make this for OTT where I have complete freedom than theater because there's so much censorship? So first question is that. And second, over the last few years, I've seen there's an increasing content for real life stories, like stories which are inspired from real life incidents. Do you think that is the case, and will that increase? Is it because, what is the reason behind it and why that's increasing?
So both really good questions. I think the answer to your first question would be that, yes, I'm sure there were filmmakers who just felt really constrained by the theatrical censorship norms in India. And therefore, when the streamers came in, decided that, listen, now we've got, the freedom to be able to tell stories that we want to tell. I can't deny that there was a certain amount of gratuitous sex and violence that came into some of the content because of that, because it was just sort of this pressure cooker that was set free, and therefore people could just get out there and do whatever they wanted to do, sometimes without relevance to without relevance to the material. But I think we're through that process now, and we're now at a place where I think people are realizing that sure, OTT gives you that opportunity. Because of the longer format of storytelling, you can let your characters cook and you can help them, live for longer. But I think we now realize that there is going to be some level of scrutiny on streamers as well. And therefore, it will not be as easy probably as it was a couple of years ago to tell stories that were, with complete abandon. So I do think there'll be a little bit of a curve on that. Your second question was about real life stories being told much more. And I think that's a fact. It's a very relevant fact. Probably because our movies were much more fantastical earlier and much more, had a lot less reality in them, that we're now gravitating towards just telling stories about real life heroes more, because our films have become more realistic too. So, I remember when we were making like a Pan Singh Tomar, for example, back in the day, that was, one of the first real stories about someone who was not either a politician or a sports hero, or, someone who was just a man who had this really interesting life. And more since that time, those stories are being told. And I think that's because of the growing realism in our cinema.
Great. Thank you so much, Abhishek. We next have Jide, who's going to be asking his question. Jide is also getting into film production and OTT platforms in Africa. So Jide, go ahead, ask your question.
All right, thanks a lot, Nagraj. This has been so interesting, Siddharth, like so enlightening at the same time. So I followed Bollywood definitely since my younger years. I remember Tufan a very long time ago. And now I see, is there a way, or do you see an opportunity for Bollywood to be a vehicle for the merging of cultures? So such as Bollywood and Nollywood, and do you see more co-production between those two cultures coming together? And my second question, because we all got second questions now, for theatrical exhibition and shortening of windows globally, I don't see pre-COVID levels ever coming back again, but I want to hear your thoughts, what you think about that, and also if you are surprised at how well Star is doing now. Thanks, Siddharth.
How well?
How well Star is doing, Hotstar.
Hotstar, right. So to your first question, yes, absolutely. I think co-productions are, the need of the hour. But I do think those co-productions need to come from a great story that is relevant to both cultures that needs to be told. Because I've been involved in a few of these co-productions in the past, which start with, let's do a co-production, and then now let's find the story. And that always ends up a little bit, like sort of topsy-turvy, because it's not coming from the right place probably. But if there's, like a film on someone or a story that has relevance to both Nigeria and to India, for example, how great would that be? Because then it's so organic, and it just makes sense for us to do a co-production for something like that. To your second question, I actually think the bigger films will get bigger, and the smaller films will sort of die on the vine in a sense, theatrically, I mean. Because you might get back to pre-COVID levels, but the composition of that revenue might be quite different going forward. You'll have a lot fewer movies releasing, but the bigger movies doing much, much better. And I just think that's because people are going to be saving up for those big event movies every year, those 3 or 4 movies that they just cannot not watch in a cinema hall, and everything else they're just going to stream. And I think to your question about Star, I'm not surprised at all. It's frankly, Disney is a great company. They've got great people there. Star mopped up all the cricket rights. They've got great content. They've got the entire, they've got massive catalogs. They've got the whole Disney Plus sort of catalog on there too. So I think it's a good time. It's a good time for them with the consolidation that's happened in the entertainment business now. I think Disney is that one studio that stands up and that can actually take on the streamers.
Thanks, awesome. Thanks for that, Siddharth. Yeah.
Thanks, Jide, for that question. We next have Shantani, who has a question. Shantani, go ahead.
It's both me and Shantani. So we have two questions. Sorry, Nagraj.
One. Come on, Arpan. Let's give everyone a chance.
The first one is something you're talking about, or like there is a consolidation that's happening. The streamers at this point of time, even though they are giving a sort of freedom, but what I am thinking is what happens when they get really powerful. Will that curb your some sort of creative freedom? Because at some point of time, the way Netflix is going, it's going to be very powerful. And how Amazon is kind of killing some other businesses as well. Netflix will have the power to dictate in recent future. So what do you think about that? Is there any real threat? And second question is, can you have a Rangle or something now?
That's a great question. That's a great second question. And unfortunately, the fact that we even have to ask it means that, that things need to get sorted out. So I'm hoping that, over time in the next few months or years, we're able to come to an equilibrium where artists' rights are respected, as well as people's right to get offended for legitimate reasons is also respected, but for non-legitimate reasons is, like sort of kept aside. Your first question, if you could just elaborate a little bit more on what you wanted me to talk about with regard to Netflix and Amazon.
So I think right now Netflix, so I can see in a recent future, because Netflix is consolidating and how we are accessing media is really changing. Netflix and Amazon Prime and Hotstar and Disney are become really powerful. At some point of time, do you see them dictating the terms of what kind of things you can make and what kind of things you can't make? And is there a carbon creative freedom that you can see in future?
As long as it's not an oligarchy or a hegemony of these 3 or 4 players only, and as long as we've got a decent, array of platforms to be able to go to as producers, I think we'll be fine. And in a sense, dictating as in it's their platform, they're putting the money in, they have a right to direct what sort of content they want to make. The problem for us would be if there are 2 or 3 of them and they're all saying the same thing, having spoken to each other on the back end. That always becomes a problem, right? But I think as long as there's a healthy competition out there, I think we're fine.
Awesome. Thanks, Arpan, for those questions. Siddharth, we are very conscious of your time, so we want to make sure that we don't overstep our boundaries in terms of taking over your time. So how much?
Oh, very good. I joined a bit late, so I'm happy to be on a little while longer.
Fab. Okay, so we'll move on to the next person. We actually have Sanya, who's going to be asking the next question.
Hi, Siddharth. Thank you so much. It's been a really interesting conversation. I actually have a question in line with what Arpan just asked. So I think in India more than anywhere, but very much so, media and content and movies especially are a massive social learning and social shaping tool. So as a producer, you kind of have the power to really hold a lot of that social narrative, right? And of course, now there's a huge input of data, and then these platforms and the amount of content they can create and has an impact. And on the other hand, there are questions of censorship or various constraints on content creation from the other end. So in between those two pressures, as a producer, you have this great ability to lead a kind of change in narrative or response in that sense. So how do you see that right now, and how do you see that going forward, and how do you approach that kind of great opportunity you have and the challenges that comes with?
So, I mean, as filmmakers, I think it's really important not to put the pressure on yourself to say, I'm going to be telling stories that are socially relevant, because you might suck all the entertainment out of what you're doing. And that would be, you'll be getting into public service announcements. So I think it's really important to start from a great story. And if your heart is in the right place, and if you've got certain, social beliefs, and you believe in certain things intrinsically, that will reflect in the stories that you gravitate towards. So for example, Dangal, I mean, I can speak about that one film because I was closely associated with it. When we heard the story of Dangal, we were fascinated by the story of these 2 female wrestlers. And then when we heard about their father, it was his story that fascinated us even more, because it was like, here's a man who was quite a male chauvinist, who was a wrestler in his day, who wasn't able to reach where he wanted to get, thought he'd live out his life through his sons. Unfortunately for him, in his mind, he had 4 daughters, and now he felt he couldn't live his dreams through them, only to realize that actually he could, and did. And therefore, it was about, in many ways, it was about female empowerment. It was about, men being able to change their mindsets with regard to the girl child. But it really stemmed from us loving the story in the first place. Now, I think that came from us maybe having certain social beliefs, and then gravitating towards stories that spoke about them, rather than the other way around, rather than setting out to tell a story about female empowerment and then looking for a story to tell. So if it happens organically, that's always the best way for it to happen. But you're right, one should be cognizant of the immense power that one wields with regard to being able to shape minds and hearts, and always use that wisely.
And then I think what I'm specifically asking is, with those new pressures of censorship one side and data and large platforms and their agendas on the other, how are you trying to still carve out your unique voice, or to really spotlight those stories that are really powerful, regardless of the meaning behind them?
So to be honest, it's a little early for us to really be able to give you a very cogent answer on how these new regulations have affected us. We're all still pretty much digesting them. They only came out last week. We're hoping that they still give us the ability to be able to create the content that we want to. But honestly, time will tell.
Great, thank you, Sanya, for your question. Next, we have Jay Prakash asking his question. Jay Prakash, are you in Mars right now? Where are you?
I figured it was quite appropriate given how we're all so isolated out here in the UK. Hi, Siddharth. My question, well, first of all, thank you so much for doing this Fireside chat. My question is, what are the keys to successful communication you've kind of identified over the years when you're telling stories to the audience?
I'm sorry, I lost you in the middle there. The key?
My question was, what are the keys to like successful communication you've identified over the years when telling stories to the audience?
I guess to start with, just be really entertaining. That's the that's really got to be the holy grail of movie making. You've got to entertain. Without that, the best stories can go to seed. So if I knew a more specific answer to your question, I would only be making hit movies. But unfortunately, I've had my fair share of failures too. So I don't know if I have a brighter answer to your question than that. But I think if it's always be entertaining, I think would be the